coming through. Record. So tonight I'm delighted to introduce to you Matteo Gelardi, who's going to talk to us about the Thermophilic Boletes, which are possibly on their way to the British Isles. And just to introduce the speaker, Matteo Gelardi works on research in mycology and systematics, currently focusing on the biodiversity of the order Boletales worldwide. He's carried out extensive field research, and he's the joint author of a recently published first volume of a monograph on the European Boletes. So I'm going to stop my screen sharing now and hand you over to Matteo.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Maria, for introducing me to the people attending this webinar conference. I'm going to show you my presentation. Let me share my PowerPoint. Okay. So you should be able to see it.
Yeah, do you want to just switch to slideshow? Perfect. Yeah, that's great.
Here it is. Okay. Well, first of all, I would like to express my sincere gratitude to the London Natural History Society for inviting me to give this presentation, which is about one of my favorite topics, which is, as you can easily imagine, bolete taxonomy and biodiversity. Before to start this conversation, I would like to spend a few words to describe my research, my previous research on boletes, and also what I'm currently doing. I can easily say that my passion for boletes started a long time ago when I was just a child, and I used to go with my parents in Italy mushroom hunting. And we basically collected porcini mushrooms, or ceps, or penny buns, or the way you prefer to call them. However, it was not until 2006 that I started to study boletes in the true sense of this word. From that date onwards, I got deep inside into the study and investigation of this amazing group of macromycetes, mainly focusing on European species, but also recording species from all around the world. In this regard, the British Mycological Society Overseas Foray, which was held in 2010 in Piedmont, northwestern Italy, was instrumental for me to know some of the most important British mycologists, as well as a group of Chinese professors coming from different universities in China. One of those professors invited me to undertake mycological research in the field in China, and as a consequence, I did several trips to China in 2011, 2012, and 2013, and I had the opportunity to collect boletes in the field in various provinces of China, in Beijing, in Shanxi, in Guangdong, in Yunnan. In 2013, I also visited the United States and Canada, and 1 year later, in 2014, I had the opportunity to collect boletes in the field in Australia, while joining the local fungi map workshop in Brisbane, and at the same time I joined the Australasian Mycological Society annual meeting, which was held in the same Brisbane. So I had the opportunity over time to collect boletes in different continents. However, my main focus remained on European boletes, and I was also helped by my wife, who is also a mycologist and a boletologist, and she is also attending this webinar meeting from Italy, so my greetings to her. And my study on boletes, on European boletes, culminated no more than a couple of months ago with the publication of what can be considered the most updated and comprehensive monographic work on European boletes. The name of the book, the title is European Boletes Volume 1, and I will spend some words at the very end of this conversation to give you some hints about the book. Okay, well, what about my current activity? Well, I'm currently working for the Royal Botanic Gardens Kew as a fungal taxonomist. I am currently involved in the FSP, which is the acronym of Fungarium Sequencing Project, which is an ambitious project aiming at sequencing the whole genome of as many type specimens as possible from the Kew Fungarium. So it is very, very exciting and ambitious project. Okay, let's cut to the chase. Relying on the main topic of this lecture, I'm going to tell you something about selected thermophilic boletes, mainly occurring in warm Mediterranean regions of Southern Europe. Just to give an idea of the species that I'm covering during this lecture, I've prepared this first slide and I've put together all the species that I will be talking about in the very next few minutes. This is just to give you a general picture. Of course, I will discuss each species singularly. Obviously, none of the species you can see in this slide have been recorded to date from the British Isles, with possibly one single exception, which I will show you later. Of course, these are not the only thermophilic boletes that have not been reported to date from the British Isles. There are some others. However, in order not to run out of time, I have decided to select the easiest to identify and the most eye-catching in order to allow you to be able to recognize them in the field, just in case they should arrive to the British Isles because of the climate change, because of the global warming. This way you will be able to record them and to report these first occurrences for the country. When I started to prepare this lecture, I realized that maybe some people attending might be not so familiar with boletes. And therefore, I've decided to add this slide, which allows me to introduce briefly boletes. So what are boletes? Boletes are mushroom-forming fungi, which are usually fleshy, and in many cases they are very large in size. They are robust, and they are characterized by a cap, which is also called pileus, a stem or stipe, and a fertile structure underneath the cap, which is consisting of tubes and pores. This hymenophoral structure is probably the most important feature for separating boletes from other pileate stipitate mushrooms, such as the agarics, which are characterized by the presence of gills underneath the cap. Of course, boletes are not the only group of mushrooms with such a sponge-like structure underneath the cap. For example, polypores share with boletes a similar fertile structure. However, it is easy to separate boletes from polypores because in boletes, the hymenophoral structure is easily detachable from the pileal context above by simple mechanical action. In polypores, by converse, the hymenophore is not at all separable from the pileus context. So this is a clear-cut difference allowing separation of these two groups. Here you can see the arrow pointing at the hymenopteral structure, the fertile part of boletes, which is easily detachable, as I was saying earlier. What else we can say about boletes? We can say that they are extremely variable in terms of colors. The color of the cap, as well as the color of the stem, and also the color of the hymenophore. And another important thing that we can say about boletes is that the surfaces may be ornamented in different ways. For example, the cap texture can vary from, for example, a tomentose or a velvety cap to a smooth or polished cap. We can have bolete with a viscid or glutinous cap, or sometimes bolete with a scaly or squamulose cap. And the same thing can be said about the stem. The stem can be smooth, but in most cases we can observe different kind of ornamentation on the stipe. For example, in some boletes we find something like a punctuation on the stipe. In some others we can find some small scales or scabrosities. In other boletes we can find an ornamentation consisting of a net or a reticulum. So all these morphological features are extremely useful, and in most cases they are diagnostic for a precise identification of bolete species in the field. An important question now arises. What is the position of boletes in the fungal tree of life? Boletes belong to the kingdom Fungi, subkingdom Dicaria, phylum Basidiomycota, subphylum Agaricomycotina, class Agaricomycetes, subclass Agaricomycetidae. In this subclass, we find the order Boletales. All boletes, no exception, belong to the order Boletales. Within this order, we find a number of suborders and several different families. I'm not naming them all here because otherwise we run out of time, and also because this is not the main topic of this conversation. This is just to say that all boletes are found inside this order. One of the most important things that we have to keep in mind when we deal with boletes is that most of them are ectomycorrhizal. This means that more than 90% of all boletes described to date worldwide are capable of forming symbiotic relationships with host plants, and therefore a proper identification of the host plant can help in the identification of the associated bolete species. As far as thermophilic boletes are concerned, they are found in southern Europe mainly in 5 different kinds of habitats. They are usually found, for example, in sweet chestnut woodlands, but they are also very common in deciduous oak woodlands with several different host plants involved. Boletes are also very common in evergreen oak woodlands, which are mainly dominated by 2 evergreen oaks, holm oak, Quercus ilex, and cork oak, Quercus suber. Another suitable habitat for Mediterranean thermophilic boletes are coastal pine forests, which are mainly dominated by 3 pine trees: the domestic pine or Pinus pinea, the maritime pine, Pinus pinaster, and the Aleppo pine, Pinus halepensis. These coastal pine forests are found all along the coastal line, very close to the seaside, and in the same kind of environment, another typical habitat is found, the famous low Mechis Mediterranean shrubland, which is dominated by small shrubs and bushes. So thermophilic boletes are mainly found in these 5 kind of habitats. However, it must be said that in many cases, these habitats are mixed with one another. So it is not so uncommon to find, for example, evergreen oak standing in the low maquis shrubland. Or otherwise, you can easily find mixed woodlands with pine trees and evergreen oaks, or other mixed woodlands with pine trees, evergreen oaks, and deciduous oaks. So sometimes it is possible to find boletes in pure stands of a single dominant host species, but in many other cases, these habitats are intermixed with each other. So this is the first thermophilic Mediterranean bolete that we take into consideration. The name of this species is Boletes regius. It is easy to recognize because of the bright strawberry red cap, which is in contrast with the bright yellow pores, tubes, stipe surface, and context. The stipe is ornamented with a reticulum, which is concolorous with the surface, and it is usually restricted to the upper part of the stipe. The context is, as I was saying earlier, yellow. In this species, we usually do not have any bluing after exposure or after injury, but sometimes a slight blue can be observed on external surfaces, for example, on stipe surface and also on the hymenophore, but it is a very weak bluing. So we can basically say that this species is nearly unchanging. The smell is agreeable, the taste is mild. This is a species occurring exclusively under broadleaf trees, mainly under oaks, but also under sweet chestnuts and more rarely under Fagus sylvatica. And this is an edible species, but after complete cooking. This species has been reported several times from the British Isles. However, none of the reports that have been recorded to date has been molecularly confirmed as such. This means that all previous record of this species from the British Isles must be considered misdetermination, and as a consequence, this species currently must be considered as non-occurring in the British Isles. Another easy species to identify is the red-powered Imperator luteocupreus. This bolete is very large, fleshy. It is characterized by a yellowish to pale pinkish cap, red ports but yellow tubes, a yellow stipe with a red reticulum. The reticulum is well visible on the stipe, well pronounced, especially because it is red over a yellow background. The context is yellow, and it turns immediately and violently blue when it is cut. And the same thing happens on the external surfaces. This mushroom immediately turns dark indigo blue at the slightest touch. This is a species occurring under broadleaf trees, especially under sweet chestnut, and this is a poisonous species. Even if completely cooked, if consumed, it can cause gastrointestinal distress. This species is the one that I was referring earlier about the possible exception to the presence of these thermophilic boletes in the British Isles. No more than 1 month ago, I was shown a picture of a single specimen from the Isle of Wight, which I immediately identified as Imperator luteocuprinos. So even if we still do not have a molecular confirmation for that collection, I'm pretty sure that this species has just reached the British Isles. And I'm sure that in the next few years you will see this species spreading out over southern England. In the same genus Imperator, we also find another species, which is Imperator tornosus, which is an extremely variable species in terms of chromatisms. This species, in fact, can have a cap which is variously colored. It can be yellow, orange, green, grayish, brown. Sometimes these colors are mixed with one another. So it is very, very variable in terms of colors. Pores are usually yellow, but they tend to become orange or red in aged specimens. The stipe is yellow with a concolorous reticulum. The context is yellow, but it turns blue, dark blue immediately, and also the external surfaces, when injured or when the specimens are handled, turn immediately dark blue. This is indeed not a single species, but a species complex, and we have recently discovered that this species contains at least 2 different taxa, and we are currently working on separating these 2 cryptic taxa and to describe one of them as a new species to science. This species occurs under both broadleaf trees and conifers, and to date it has never been reported for the British Isles. Another beautiful species that we can find in southern Europe and which might be expected to reach southern England is Rubroboletus lupinus. It is easy to identify because of the pastel pink cap, the red pores, and the yellow stripe, which is sometimes mottled red. In this case, the stipe is without any kind of ornamentation, so the stipe is smooth. Even in this case, we can observe an oxidation to blue externally and internally, which is rather intense. The habitat is in sandy soil, usually under oaks, under both deciduous oaks and evergreen oaks. This is a poisonous species, even if eaten completely cooked, and it causes gastrointestinal upset. In the same habitat as the previous species, we can find Rubroboletus pulchratinctus. This is a pale colored bolete. The cap is usually whitish gray or grayish, but the cap margin is pinkish. Pores and tubes are yellow. The stipe is also yellow, sometimes with some flushes of pink or pale reddish. And the reticulum is concolorous to the surface. The bluing in this species is present, but is less intense than in the previous one. So it is a slight, weak bluing. The smell in this species is disagreeable, especially in mature and aged specimens. And this is also poisonous as the previous one. A very unique and beautiful bolete is Exudopornus permagnificus. First of all, this bolete is characterized by a small to medium size, and you can evaluate the size of the specimens by comparing them with the size of the oak leaves on the top of the picture. Another important feature that must be highlighted is that these species tend to grow in clusters, sometimes with up to 15 specimens growing together from a common base, and the general color is red. So we can see that these species have a red color overall. It is a bluing species, and the bluing is rather intense, but what makes this species really unique is the presence in young and fresh specimens of golden yellow droplets which are exuded by the pores. These droplets represents a unique feature and makes this species practically unmistakable among all European boletes. And another thing that can be said about these droplets is that they are extremely salty. And this feature was discovered by my wife, who was the first who tasted them and discovered this particular feature. This is an edible species, but it must be cooked completely before consumption. It grows, of course, on sandy soil under broadleaf trees, usually close to the seaside, and it prefers to grow under oaks, especially deciduous oaks. Another very peculiar species is Cuproboletus poikilochromus. In this case, we have a certain chromatic variability. Young specimens are completely yellow everywhere. However, as soon as they ripe, they tend naturally to become ochraceous, orange, and then orange-red, reddish-brown, and finally copper-brown. And it happens very often that when you are in the field and you find young specimens and aged specimens at the same place, you believe that you are handling species belonging to two different taxa. But in reality, they are just the true chromatic extreme of the developmental stage. So they have this natural evolution of colors from yellow to dark copper brown. In this species, the stipe shows a reticulum, which is with elongated meshes. But what makes this species unique is the smell. The smell is extremely strong. It is difficult to characterize. We can simply define the smell as strongly sweety or sweetish. The fact is that when you handle specimens of this species, the smell remains imprinted in your fingers, and even if you wash your hands, after many hours or even after days, you can still smell the species on your fingers. And even upon drying, the smell remains, and it also becomes stronger, and it can last in herbarium material for years, if not for decades. So the smell is probably the most important and diagnostic features for recognizing this species in the field, because it is a unique feature. No other bolete known worldwide have a similar, strong, penetrating, intense smell. Despite the smell, which is in any case agreeable because it is a sweetish smell, this species is edible and it is even tasty, but it must be cooked completely before consumption. Another beautiful Mediterranean species is Lanmaoa fragrans. This one is characterized by an evenly chocolate brown cap, which is usually velvety. Pores are yellow. The stipe is also yellow, but very often it is flushed with red, especially in the lower part. And the stipe is smooth. So in this case, we do not have any reticulum. The stipe, in addition, tends to become smaller toward the base. It is tapering, and it tends to penetrate in the soil, so it is slightly rooting. The context and the external surfaces of the ports and stipe are bluing. This species has a specific smell. The smell is similar to that of boiled milk, which is also a unique feature among European boletes. So it is easy to recognize even because of this particular smell. The taste is mild, and this species is, of course, edible, but even in this case, we must be careful and complete cook it before consumption. This is a species occurring mainly under broad-leaved trees, especially oaks, but also under sweet chestnut. A very similar species when compared to the previous one is Baurangia emileorum. This species shares with the previous one the sides, the tendency of the stipe to taper towards the base, the absence of reticulum. The main difference is related to the color of the cap, which is in this case garnet red or purple red. And also the smell is slightly different. It is agreeable but not milk-like. In this case, it is fruit-like. So it is an agreeable and intense smell of fruit. The habitat is, as I was saying earlier, the same as for Landmauer fragrans. And also this species is edible after complete cooking. Alessioporum cycnusanus is another particular bolete. These species tend to grow in clusters, cespitous, with sometimes up to 20 specimens originating from a common base. It is characterized by a brown cap, which is beset by innate radial fibrils, which are darker than the background. Pores, tubes, and stipe are yellow. The stipe is ornamented with a well-developed reticulum with elongated meshes, but the most important morphological feature we can observe in this species is the presence of a granulose ring-like belt in the middle part of the stem. This ring-like structure is what remains of the original point of connection between the cap margin and the stipe surface. So in young specimens, the hymenophore is covered by something like a false veil, which soon disappears, but remain this track on the stipe. The context is bluing, as well as the external surfaces. The habitat is consisting mainly of oaks, and this is a species occurring under both evergreen and deciduous oaks. This is an edible species, but not so tasty, so it is better to avoid from consumption. Very, very similar to Alessioporum cycnusanus is Pulchroboletus roseoalbidus. The same size, the same tendency to grow in clusters, cespitous. But here we have a species with very different colors when compared to the previous one. In this case, the cap is pale whitish pink or pale pinkish. and the stipe is devoid of reticulum. In this case, the stipe is slightly pruinose. But even in this case, if we observe the surface of the stem, we can see a similar granulose ring-like structure, which is very, very similar to the one that I showed you in the previous picture. So even in this case, we have young specimens with a sort of false veil, which soon disappears as the specimens ripe. Another important feature of this species is that when you cut the specimens in half longitudinally, you can see that the flesh in the cap is pinkish. It is already pinkish, so it is not the result of oxidation. It is already pinkish. In the stipe, the context is yellowish, but it immediately turns blue. So you have basically two different colors. In the cap, you can see a pinkish flesh, and in the lower part of the basidium, especially in the stipe, the color is blue. The habitat is the same as the previous species, so even in this case, it is possible to find this taxon under oaks, especially under broad-leaved oaks and deciduous, and evergreen oaks. And it is also edible, but like the previous one, it is not so tasty, so it is better to avoid consumption. Another very beautiful and eye-catching bolete is Xerocomellus redoili. This species has a dark garnet red pilose surface, which contrasts with the bright yellow ports and stem. However, the base of the stem is of the same color of the cap. As you can see in the specimens laying down on the ground, the base of the stem is typically reddish, so it recalls the color of the cap. The bluing here is nearly not present at all. So we can say that this species is unchanging, but sometimes you can observe scattered bluing here and there, which is, however, a faint bluing, and basically in most cases when you handle them or when you cut them in half, you can see no bluing at all. This species tends to grow on sandy soil, very close to the seaside, and it occurs with a preference with evergreen oaks. This is also edible, but not so tasty. So even in this case, it is better not to be consumed. Another beautiful species, which is common along the coastal line in southern Europe, is Lexinellum lepidum. This species show a brownish cap, a yellow hymenophore and stem surface. The surface of the stem is typically scurfy. It exhibits small scales, and so the surface is scabrous. The context upon exposure is yellowish, but it tends to turn pinkish and then grayish, especially in the connection zone between the cap and the stipe. And you can easily see this oxidation phenomenon in the half specimen laying down on the ground. Another important feature to be stressed about this species is that it only and exclusively occurs under evergreen oaks. This is an edible and tasty species, and in Italy, for example, it is also locally sold in markets. Very similar to the previous one is Lexinellum corsicum. Very similar in terms of colors, in terms of size. The difference, the most important difference, is that this species only occurs in ectomycorrhizal relationship with rock roses, and therefore with species of the genus Cistus in the family Cistaceae. So this species is only found in the low maquis Mediterranean shrublands where rock roses are usually abundant. Of course, this species is edible like the previous one, or probably it is even better uh, as far as the organoleptic features are concerned with respect to the previous species. The last two species that we take into consideration belong to the genus Suillus. So the first one of the two that we take into account is Suillus berlinii. This species is characterized by a viscid to glutinous cap. At the very beginning, the color of the cap is entirely white, but it tends to be pigmented in brown shades starting from the center, and then these colors spread out towards the external surfaces until in mature specimen we have an evenly brown cap. Pores are initially whitish, then they become cream colored or yellowish. This type is white. It is ornamented with brownish or brownish red dots. And you can also observe in young and fresh specimens the presence of milky white droplets which are extruded by pores and by the upper part of the stipe surface. This feature is not anymore visible in mature and over mature specimens, so it is just detectable in young and fresh specimens. Upon cutting, as you can see, the context is pure white and completely unchanging. This species occurs exclusively under pine trees, so it is a strictly associated species with Mediterranean pine trees. The second species of the genus Suillus is Suillus mediterranensis, very similar to the previous one, but in this case the cap is brownish since the beginning, although sometimes it is possible to find some paler patches on the cap, which are usually colored pale yellow or pale ochraceous. So in many cases, we do not have a uniform brown surface. It is blotched with some areas which are paler than the rest of the surface. The stem is yellow, and also the context upon exposure is completely yellow. I have added this picture, which allows you to clearly see the main difference between these two species, which can grow in the same habitat under the same trees, so they can usually grow symmetrically. But if you cut the specimens in half, you can see that in Suillus berlinii you have a pure white flesh, while in Suillus mediterranensis you have a bright yellow flesh. So this is the most important diagnostic difference, allowing a clear-cut separation of these two fungal species. Both species are edible. However, I recommend to peel out the cuticle from the cap context because the cuticle tends to be laxative. So it can be consumed, but be careful. Okay, so I have finished the taxonomic part. Before to stop the presentation, I would like to give you some hints about European Boletes, Volume 1, which was published no more than a couple of months ago. Well, the main goal of this book is to introduce European boletes with tubular provide hymenophore, including Philoporus, which is the only exceptions among boletes, because Philoporus is a bolete genus with gills in the underside of the cap, in depth. Thanks to the English language, this monography aims at reaching as wide an audience as possible to stimulate interest in boletes. Emphasis is put on accurate morphological descriptions with meaningful photographs and very, very detailed geographic distribution of all boletes treated in Europe and sometimes even abroad for those species that have been reported from outside Europe. Inclusive lists of homotypic and heterotypic synonyms are provided for each species. The book includes the most comprehensive list of bibliographic sources on European boletes ever published to date. We have put in the references more than 2,500 entries, just to give you an idea. Due to phenotypic plasticity of bolete taxa, each one of the 90 species, varieties, and forms is presented on 2 to 12 pages, so they are treated in very, very great detail. This monography gathers and summarizes all taxonomic, nomenclatural, and systematic novelties in a single book, because the problem with mushrooms is that many times we find information scattered in different journals, books. So our aim was also to take all this information and put it together into a single publication. So some final information about the book. European Boletes Volume 1 offers a 100-page long introduction, which also includes dichotomous keys to genera and species, 90 species, varieties, and forms described in detail, more than 1,500 photos, 2,500 references, I was telling earlier, a comprehensive index to genera and species, A4 format, more than 700 pages, and a total weight of more than 5 kilos. This book is available at the eShop fungipress.it, which is the official eShop, but it is also available at several specialized booksellers such as NHBS, Summerfield Books, Core Scientific Books, Microservice, Microweb, etc. And that's all, folks. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Matteo. That was really fascinating, and yeah, I like all the cats. That's very good. Just the quality of the photography, I was just very impressed by, as well as all the the kind of information that you were giving us, and that I think that was a really good overview of some very interesting species. And I mean, one of the, obviously, I'm going to just have a quick question myself, and then we've got some questions from the chat. You mentioned about the Imperator luteus cupreus, which has been found in the Isle of Wight. Is that just a one-off sighting, do we think? And what would be your idea about which one might turn up next? Is there one that is particularly likely to be the next one to appear?
Well, it is not so easy to answer this question. Mushrooms are, generally speaking, unpredictable. So we might expect all of the species that I'm showing you as possible candidates to reach the British Isles in the very next few years. So Imperator luteus cupreus is just an example of a species that has just reached the British Isles, and it reached the British Isles no more than 1 month ago. And it is expected to spread out in southern England, but many other species are expected to arrive. Maybe if I can tell a name, probably Butyronic Boletes regius might be a perfect candidate as one of the next species that we might expect to see in this country. But any other of the species that I've shown you might arrive here one day or another very soon in the future.
Thank you. And if we can can I hand over to you, Anka, to pick up some of the questions from the chat? There's been some interesting things that people have raised.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just sorry, I'm just adding some more in. Um, I was just going to ask just a very quick question about the Imperator lutecupreus. When would be the best time of year to look for them? I mean, obviously now, if one was found just a month ago at the Isle
Yeah.
of Wight.
Well, the best period for spotting that species should be during summertime, July, August, the first part of September, taking into consideration that it is a thermophilic species, so it is a species loving high temperature, and we have the highest temperature here during July and August. So that is probably the best time when we can spot that species in the field.
And so, well, Maria kind of asked a little bit about, these species coming in, and there have been a few questions sort of related to that. One person, Molly, was asking what the likelihood of the thermophilic boletes coming or spreading to the UK as the climate warms. Um, but people were also wondering how. I mean, so, we say, okay, they might be coming here soon, but how are they coming on imported wood, imported living trees? How do they enter the UK?
Well, even in this case, it is not so easy to answer this question because mushrooms have several ways to move from a place to another. Probably the easiest way they have is by a spore long dispersal. So from France, for example, they can easily reach the southern part of England by simply moving through winds, and the spores can move from a place to another place. So the long distance in this case might be a good way they can use to move from a place to another. But also with, for example, from the point of view of planted trees, that might be another way they can use to spread in new places and to colonize new territories. So also the import of host plants can be a way they can use to spread over a new place from the region from the regional place from where they're coming.
Yeah, and biosecurity isn't very strong or anything
Yeah,
in the UK. So,
yeah.
I mean, there's quite a few other species that are making it over through houseplants and things. There's an interesting question from Mariko. In addition to your 5 categories of habitats for boletes, could the beech woodland also be a habitat for them? Because that's a particular type of environment, as you know, that's quite common in
Yeah,
southern UK.
yeah. They can form ectomycorrhizal association. Most of the species that I've shown you are capable of forming association with beech trees, with
Mm.
Fagus sylvatica. So, for example, in Italy, Mediterranean species are found in association with beech trees at relatively high elevations because the latitude is lower in Italy. But for example, in southern England, they can easily form association with beech trees at sea level or in plain places, so they do not need to reach high altitudes because we are at a different latitudinal gradient. So they are expected to be found also under beech trees, although it is easier to find them under oaks or under sweet chestnut because being thermophilic boletes, they prefer to grow with plants that usually grow with warmer climate. And of course, oaks and sweet chestnuts are more common in hot, in warm places rather than beech trees, which is a tree species preferring cooler places.
Another question that's arisen, I think one is fairly obvious, but another one, with the Boletes, the kind of the new Boletes coming in, would they present any threats to the native British species?
No, I don't think so. They can live together without influencing each other. At least generally speaking, we are talking about species that, well, they are not introduced in general. So they should live sympatrically with other species that currently are already here, as happens in other places in Europe. So they are simply expected to arrive here and to simply live together with other species without uh, uh, constituting any threat to their survival. So there should be no specific danger. I mean,
And I mean, Sally was asking if there would be any danger of these species, them being poisonous to hedgehogs and red deer, red squirrels, hedgehogs, but these are species that are in Europe anyway.
yeah, they are scattered everywhere in Europe. They do not constitute any problem for wild animals at all. Wild animals know very well what to eat and what not to eat.
They've learned, yes.
Yeah, we should learn from them.
Yeah.
They
Exactly.
know far better than us what is edible and what it is not.
We've probably got time for maybe just one or two quick, if they're quick, questions before we wrap up, Anka.
Well, there was one that you asked about, and I've seen there's a whole discussion in the comments. And I'm sure that Matteo hasn't had a chance to read them, so it's a little unfair of me to ask this question, but
Yeah.
I'm going to anyway. So Maria, we can blame Maria for this. In terms of the reports of Butu Boletus regius in Britain
Yeah.
that haven't been confirmed, which species could they be instead?
It might be another Boletus species, which is it had another name. Currently, the name of that species, which might have been confused with regius, the current name is Fuscoroseus. But in the past, up to 10, 20 years ago, it was called Pseudoregius. So it changed the name because mycologists have discovered that an earlier name was available for that species. So most likely, all British records of Boletus regius comes in reality under the name Pseudoregius, or as we can call it now, Fuscoroseus.
We've got, yeah, that's what David Satori was saying as well. There's another question that's just popped up regarding Letonellum lepidum. Do you have
Yeah,
any opinion regarding the nomenclature lepidum versus oh, I'm not even going to try to read that.
Limchenensis.
Yeah, that's it. Trying to read it with bad
Yeah,
eyes and
we've
too
got
Well,
many
some good
consonants.
challenging words today.
well, for the sake of nomenclatural stability, it is better to continue to use the name lepidum because the name Tlemcenensis was proposed in the first half of the 20th century, but it immediately fell into oblivion. So nobody used that name. So even if that name should be considered the current name to be applied to that species because it takes priority because of chronological reason, it is better in that specific case not to use it because otherwise it destabilizes the nomenclature. So it is better to continue to use the name Lepidum, which is a universally accepted and used names by all mycologists. So in that case, we have a specific reason why we should stick on that name rather than to use another one which has never been used over time.
Yeah.
Thank you. And if you do get a chance to look at the chat at all, there's been it's been a very kind of thoughtful and involved chat. So which is great. So thanks to everybody for their contributions on that. And a lot of people saying, you know, how much they've enjoyed the talk, very inspiring, and really, you know, found that you covered a lot of ground, and with your, you know, sharing your great expertise. So thank you once again, Matteo, for
Thank you
the
very
talk
much for
to
your
us. We
attention.
really
Thank you
enjoyed
for
it.
inviting me.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody.
I'm gonna if we let me do that. If people would like to unmute themselves to say thank you, that would be great. So I'll let you enable you to do that. Just before you do that, though, to let you know that our next talk in this series will be